story, but I remember what happened. Okay, it's a scary.
Oh, I gotta tell you another. I got a ghost story to tell you.
Okay, so what had happened was there was this girl, and she went to Venezuela, right? Because that's where she's from.
There's a guy.
So she went to her aunt's house because she lives in Venezuela. She went, and so she went, right, and she stayed at her aunt's house because that's where she lived, right? So every night she would hear this like woman crying, and then she'd be like, oh, like she would walk in her aunt's room and be like, are you crying? And like she would be sleeping, so she's like, no, that's not her, so who in the bed is crying, you know? So she like was sleeping or whatever, and there was a store like there, she went out to like the public or whatever to like go shopping for clothes, not clothes, for food, right? Because her aunt needs to go grocery shopping, obviously, they're pregnant. So she went out to go buy some food, and her neighbor was there, right? And they were like, oh, like, hi, hola señora, like, how's your day? Like, just having a like a normal conversation with her. So she was like, oh, I'm good and whatever, right? And then the man that was her neighbor, he was like, oh, did you hear that crying last night? But like, was that you? Because it was really loud. And then he's like, she's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. So then he's like, no, that wasn't you. And then she's like, no. And then he's like, well, it sounded like it was coming from your house because I asked, you know, the other neighbor, like this morning or whatever, right? So she's like, no, that wasn't me. Like, they probably got the wrong neighbor or whatever. So then, excuse me, the girl is like, her niece is the one that heard the crying. So she was like, oh, she told her aunt, yeah, I heard crying, like, but I don't know where it was coming from. I was trying to find out who was crying. So then the aunt was like, oh, okay, well, like, if anything happens, like, just let me know, wake me up and like tell me. So she's like, okay, right? So then the next night, right, she's sleeping and she hears the crying again. So she knows it's not her aunt, so she goes outside and she doesn't hear the crying, but she goes back inside and then there's somebody crying again. Mama, tell me why this fool goes to the bathroom and there's this lady with long hair just standing in front of the mirror, right? And this fool is gonna be like, who are you? Tell me why this lady turned around, right, and screamed in her face and she disappeared.
Oh, no. That's scary.
Mama, I was like, I know you lying.
There was this young supermodel girl. Her name was Savannah. And she had just moved to New York. And well, she had moved from a little small town in Kansas to New York because you know she's been working hard to be a supermodel.
Yeah. And
she moves into this apartment building with with one of her friends, and so she ends up moving to New York with one of her friends, right? Like a roommate. She got a roommate or whatever, and her roommate ended up leaving out of town. And so she was like, hey, like the rent money, I put on the thing, just give it to the owner when he comes. So in her room there's this hole, and every time she looks through it, it's red. So she's like, okay, that's kind of weird, what's going on? So she's like, whatever, you know, because there's another neighbor that's across from there. So she was like, okay, whatever, I'll just ignore it. Maybe, you know, maybe it's just something blocking her, you know? So then she goes to the owner. She said, hey, she's like, do you know anything else about the other tenants that live here? He said no. He's like, maybe like your neighbor, you know, that's about it. But like, he doesn't talk much. He doesn't come out. He doesn't talk much. She's like, okay, do you know anything else about any other neighbor? She said no, there's just like an old lady that lives next door to you guys, and this man, you know, but you never see him, right? So
that's
she was
weird,
like, that's weird.
Thinking that's her neighbor, like, and you don't see him at all. Like,
so then she says sometimes his godson, or his grandson, or whatever, my bad, his grandson comes over and, you know, does his groceries, right, because he's disabled. And she was like, you'll see him, you'll meet him, like, sooner or later, you know, you'll see him one day. So every time she sees the hole, she just looks at it, looks through it, doesn't cover it, just like, you know, mad confused. She keeps seeing red. Oh, that's weird. Okay, maybe it's something. She kept thinking maybe it's a girl storm. She, you know, kept thinking maybe it's just something covering it. So soon he kept saying how how yeah, you know, maybe something covering it or whatever, right? So then she keeps seeing the red room, right? And they're like, oh, maybe that's weird. So then she's like, maybe it's covered, maybe it's like, you know, something, whatever, right? Maybe he doesn't want people looking in. So she ended up covering the hole, right? And one day she saw his grandson coming to deliver groceries, like as the guy said. And then she's like, hey, my name is, you know, Savannah. I live next door to your grandpa. And then he's like, oh, it's hi, it's nice to meet you. He's like, you're very beautiful, you know? And then he was like trying to flirt with her, whatever. And so then she was like, ha ha ha, like, thank you, like, pretty much saying, you know, like, I just moved here, my roommate left, you know, whatever, right? So then she kept hearing somebody yell one night. Just sleeping, woke up to somebody yelling. And she's like, oh, maybe it's the old man. Maybe I should go check on him. So she knocks on the door. Nobody answers. She said, that's kind of weird. You know, maybe he's okay. So she ended up calling his grandson. His grandson ended up coming. And, you know, checking on the old man. He was sleeping. And she said, well, I heard yelling coming from you know, his apartment. Does he have, like, nightmares or anything? He's just like, oh, no, he's disabled. It happens. And then he's like, just ignore it. Don't ever step into his apartment. And she said, why? She's like, just don't ever step in his apartment. So she said, that's kind of weird.
Weird, yeah, that's weird.
So she's like, that's weird. Maybe he likes his privacy. She left it alone. A couple months later, her roommate comes back from her trip. She said, hey, did you know the old guy across is like very like weird?
There's a car. Where's Caesar?
Cracked him.
Die already now?
I cracked the anime skin. Cracked her. She said, sorry, I'll tell it after this story.
Okay.
He fell down.
Oh yeah, he went.
Cracked him. He's in the car. He's in the car.
Go back, car up.
Those other people?
Yeah, they're coming right here by me. What's up? Huh? Oh my god.
It's a lot of people.
I was low. I didn't hit her at all. But... Hold on, yeah, she's on the top.
So then she ended up telling the roommate about how weird the old man was, right? So then she was like, you know, he's very by himself, like very, you know, whatever. So then just heal up. So the guys end up, you know, whatever, right? So he ended up talking. She ended up talking to her roommate all night about the old man. And she said, dude, there's this thing in my room that kind of freaks me out because it's always green. And she said, are you sure? And she's like,
green
yeah,
or red?
it's red. My bad, I'm sorry.
Oh,
girl, it's because I seen the med kit, I'm like, ooh, green. And I freaked out. So then it ended up being like, it's always red, I don't know what to do. So she's like, you don't know? And she's like, what are you talking about? She said, that guy has a red eye deformity.
That was his eye?
She's been looking inside his eye. I can't believe we messed them up. There's a get on top of the house.
I can't believe I was building is what it is. Where they at?
Hold on. Knocked him.
Okay. I'm moving a fat head, man.
She's low.
Got her.
Here, that's your shit. You guys good? Take this stuff. Take this stuff.
Yeah.
Come on, we gotta
take
jump
that
these fools.
scar.
We gotta jump these fools.
Whoever doesn't have a scar, take that scar, bro. Yeah. Period.
Grandma 40. What am I
You have a scar?
Yeah.
Yeah. Take that scar next one. You wanna take a launch pad or no?
There's somewhere, bro.
Right here.
Where?
Sea.
Oh, over here?
Scan that, please.
Take it out. I see
North,
on the right here.
north.
Do not even you were doing the same emote.